and welcome back to Channel 8 News, where tonight's top story is China's child labor.
It appears that China didn't learn from what happened during the Industrial Revolution in England because it's happening again in China right now. In the Industrial Revolution, families were moving out of the countryside and into the big cities where the only work they could get would be in factories. Families had very little money, and that meant that children had to work. Children were subject to working long hours, working on or with heavy, dangerous machinery, then to get little pay. Sometimes even employers would provide below-par food and shelter and claim that was their pay. Meanwhile, these kids were also not going to school, and when they grew up, they just stayed working in factories.
The same thing is going on in China right now. Children are working long hours, getting little pay or poor food and shelter with no pay. They have to work with dangerous machinery. Children are being exploited and not going to school. And when they grow up, they continue to be factory workers because they can't get a better job without schooling. And so, their children work in factories as well, and the cycle continues.
The origin to Chinese child labor is quite similar to the Industrial Revolution as well. In the late 19th century, China had their own industrial revolution where labor moved from the feudal, serf-type work to factory labor. Children had already been a part of the labor force in the fields, so it was an easy transition into the factories. Children started to become a bigger and bigger part of the workforce, to a point at which it was as bad as England's Industrial Revolution. In 1949, the Communist Revolution in China quickly succeeded in taking over the country because of how exploited the people were by the government. After the revolution, almost all children were attending primary school, and that fixed child labor for a while. But in the final decades of the 20th century, China had an economic boom that put out the perfect setting for more child workers, and the situation became again the same as in the 18th and 19th century England. An article in Human Rights in China by Andrea Morley suggests it is estimated that of the 250 million children aged 5 to 14 in the world who are legally employed worldwide, 61% are in Asia. As China has one of the largest Asian economies and has rapidly transformed its economy in recent years, the issue of child labor is of significance to the country. That leads up to today, which there is a situation has gotten better, but not by much.
All these events led to the oppression of the poor and the impoverished. The upper class, company owners, and the government have created this situation where there's no free education past elementary school. The education isn't good, and often there won't be any schools nearby. The people that could fix the problem have no incentive to, because currently it is benefiting them to have these child workers that will work for dirt cheap. And because they won't provide the proper education, these people will never be able to leave poverty. Without an education, they will never get well-paying jobs and be forced to be jobless or work in factories. Then their children are born into poverty, and since the families will have no money to support them, they will be forced to send them to work or sell them to factory owners. Despite rising living standards for many Chinese people, there are large sections of the population who are slipping further into poverty, and the gap between the rich and the poor is increasing steadily. And all the people that could be changing that are choosing not to.
Another thing, China has signed the ILO Minimum Age Convention and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which states, you have the right to protection from work that harms you and is bad for your health and prevents you from receiving an education. If you work, you have the right to be paid fairly. This doesn't seem to be the most obeyed rule in China. As stated earlier, these children are working with large, heavy, and dangerous machinery. The Human Rights Watch observes, in June 2007, 500 middle school children in the Western Territory of Sichuan were found in actively work for 14 hours in a factory in Dongguan, Guangdong Province, as part of their summer employment. These children were provided with inadequate food and were forced to live in clustered dormitories. This led to health issues. Also, children were charged for production errors. There are also several national laws that should prevent child labor and underage working, but the punishments given out are not enough to outweigh the benefits of using children. One article in Workers' Daily summed up the profitability of employing children and quoted the employer as saying, "For every piece produced by an adult worker, I have to pay $1, while I only have to pay a child 70 cents. Children food and lodging are also cheaper." Now we cut to an interview from earlier today that I had with a child who used to work in a factory in China. Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thanks.
What is it like in these factories?
It's terrible. We have to work extremely long hours in unsafe conditions, while constantly being worried about making errors, because we will get punished.
Can you negotiate this with your employer?
If we tried to, they would either throw us out or punish us. We need those jobs because our families have no money. Whatever they offer us, we will take, because we are on equal ground to negotiate.
Hasn't China signed the UN Convention of Rights?
Yes, they have, but they completely disregard it. Everything we do and have to go through, we shouldn't. It's not legal, and it's just not right. They even have ways of getting around the national laws. They make us sign up with fake or borrowed IDs, so it appears that we are over 16. That way, when the factory gets in trouble for child labor, it's not our fault.
Wow, that is terrible and completely not fair to the people of China who are in poverty and have no way to fight back.
Also, sometimes our employers do get caught, but the amount that they can exploit us makes it way cheaper and worth getting caught to use us. For example, they pay us way less, we get no health care, we have to work for extremely long hours. Using us reduces their production cost, and we can do jobs in tight spaces and with more agility. It's just not right.
Well, I hope you enjoy your time here in Canada with your family and our free schooling.
Maybe I can get a real job, other than a factory worker, here in Canada with my education.
Thanks for coming on and sharing your story.
You're welcome.
Well, it definitely seems like history is repeating itself.
Yes, it is very similar to England's Industrial Revolution.
After this break, we talk about how the sun might just be on fire.
And how Donald Trump plans to build a wall
On the moon!